Kaysville Power Board. My name is Brock Thane. I'm the chairman, and we're going to do introductions. So we'll start with you, Jordan. We'll go all the way around if we can. So.
Sure. Jordan Stevenson.
Patrick Hine.
Sean Chilcote.
Alan Farnes.
Susan Lee.
Oh, Stacy Harwood.
Gary Hatch.
Bruce Rigby.
Ryan Judd. Dean Stewart.
Okay, perfect.
Hey, Brock, did I miss minutes?
Do we have minutes for everyone?
Just the agenda.
Or agenda?
Yeah,
The
they're
agenda.
right at the end there.
Oh, I missed them.
Yeah,
Sorry, my bad.
Oh, you're good. I got spoiled.
I have
I
one
have more
extra.
than one.
So I didn't know.
No. You gotta come. I don't think Jordan, do you have one? Do you have minutes?
No, I don't.
Oh, look at us, we're slackers.
Do
Okay.
you have one more, Gary, for Alan?
I have
Oh.
one now, but
Oh, you do? Oh.
John might need one when
Oh.
he gets here.
I know John's gonna be a little late, he has
Yeah.
some meeting at 6:20.
And
I
Weber.
can't remember now.
You
Weber,
had
that's
class,
what
I
it was,
think,
yeah.
tonight. So. Okay. Anything else? If not, then we'll go ahead and start with the open ceremonies, and Sean's gonna do the blessing.
Dear and kind Heavenly Father, we come before you this night. We express our gratitude for the goodness of our lives and the opportunity that we have to live in this peaceful and beautiful area. We pray, Heavenly Father, for Thy Spirit to be with us this night. We pray that we'll be able to have clarity and be able to talk and visit and to have ideas and thoughts that will be in the best interest of Kaysville. And we're grateful once again for Thy love and for the goodness of our lives. And we just invite Thy Spirit to be with us and do it in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Sean, appreciate that. The next topic is the proposed fiber optics with Ryan Judd. So Ryan, if we'll turn the time over to you to discuss that.
I think I'll go ahead and kick it off. Thanks for letting us take a few minutes to talk about a project that we're currently working on that we think is important to not only the electric utility but to the city. The project we're talking about is extending our fiber optic network to the substations within the community. We currently have fiber optics to all buildings, and we'd like to make that extension to the power substations. We think obviously there's some great benefits for the power utility in doing that, especially as we look forward to the AMI system. But we think there are also some additional benefits for the city. And Ryan may take some time and explain that. I think the reason for bringing this to your attention is twofold, is to recognize that there are definitely benefits to the power utility, but also other benefits with the fiber optic network. And then certainly this will have a financial impact on the electric utility as we move forward. Maybe real quick where we are, we have been talking about this project for a number of months. We're currently in the process of soliciting engineering work to work with an engineer to help us scope the project, identify any pitfalls there may be, and also provide a financing cost for this project. So that's kind of where we're headed. Ryan Judd is our IT manager, and we'll let Ryan explain the project and answer any questions you have.
Thank you.
So really, I guess this could be more of a discussion too, rather than just me talking. So, I just wanted to maybe give you some background on our network. Currently, we have fiber optic, like Dean said, between here, actually between the police station and 5 other buildings. That fiber optic is single mode, and it provides a 10 gigabit backbone between each one of the buildings. It was put in 2005 as a part of a project that we were working on. We had actually installed a year earlier wireless between all the buildings, and the wireless we quickly figured out that it was going to be inadequate, and we were having difficulty making a constant connection between the buildings. So we decided we were going to move forward with fiber between the buildings. We reached out to Davis County, and Davis County participated in the installation of the fiber optics. So it made it good for us, it made it good for them. They utilized the fiber between their aging center, is it called the aging center? The senior center and the Davis County Admission Center. And so they have strands, well, they co-own the strands with us. So anyway, that's kind of the nutshell of that. Initially, we put in a 100 megabit connection, and then 4 or 5 years later, we upgraded to a gig, and now it's 10 gig. So, and we have multiple connections to the operations center where we host our backups. So that's where we keep our backups. So that's just kind of the gist of what we're doing. And our thought process is that we want to, because we have experience with the fiber optic, we want to expand that to the substations where we can maintain a good connection with their needs there. And there are going to be some additional benefits too on the side. So anyway, is there any questions or anything like that?
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
First, what engineering companies are you going to engineer this?
So we haven't decided who we're going to go to just yet.
Okay.
We've reached out to two engineering companies, and they provided quotes. That doesn't necessarily mean that'll be everybody that we go to.
So who?
B&A was one of them, and RMWT was the other.
Okay. So are they going to write up 2 proposals, one for ADSS or one for OPGW, or how are you going to do that?
Well, OPGW is multi-mode. We're not going to go with multi. It'll be single mode fiber. So
No, you can go single mode in OPGW.
No.
So you're not thinking it'll be underhung ADSS?
I'm not familiar with what you're saying.
ADSS is self-supporting OPG or fiber optic inside of a PVC tube that is generally run at the communication level on a power pole.
Right.
Easier installation, but more prone.
Yeah, as I've talked to both the engineers, they're either going to wrap the fiber on a cable, or it's going to be
like a figure 8.
Yeah, well, or they're going to have a figure 8 cable. So I'm not sure of the terms between those. So currently we have the figure 8 installation. So it's 48 strands with a steel cable wrapped in plastic sheathing.
Right.
I think that's what we hope the engineers will tell us, what the best configuration is.
Well, here's the thing. If we're going into the substations, I'm assuming the transmission lines already have a static. You guys don't have a static on your on your 46 kV. There's no static. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you're talking about running the fiber optic on the static line with the power.
The OPGW overhead.
Provo City does that, and we went and visited Provo City and looked at their installation. But we don't have the infrastructure to do that, so it will be a different kind of installation. Yeah.
Really? Okay. All right. Yeah, those were my questions.
All the substations. So
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry?
our transmission does not connect to all our substations. 46, excuse me. That's ours.
Okay.
So that's the reason why.
So then it will probably be an ADSS or your wrap or your...
Right. Whatever the engineer Rick runs probably will.
Then I'm assuming, will the power company install that, or will we bid that out to somebody to install?
So when we do the engineering, we'll have it so that the project is turnkey, basically. So we're not gonna have our power department do that. They're already overloaded.
Sure.
And I think that they don't have some of the equipment they would need to do that installation. It's just not the same.
Gotcha. All right. Okay.
Do we have a rough budget at this point for what we're thinking about spending on it? And then also I'm curious about what the plan is to pull out of the substations, just big picture.
Well, I don't know if we have a rough budget. We do.
We have some cost estimates anyway, and they're pretty broad. I think we have, what, from 225 to 450.
Okay.
We've always, in the back of our head, said about 350 to do a project like this, but it really, until we have an engineer to scope it, and you know, we have some crossings to deal with UDOT, and of course we don't know what they're going to require. So until we really scope the project, I think it's really difficult to come up with a budget.
And what are the thoughts on what we're going to bring out of the substations? Information, breaker positions, metering, voltages, power flows?
All the above.
So there's a number of things, not including SCADA and telemetry. We also have video at each one of the substations. Currently with our fiber, we push up to a mountain tower from the operations center, a wireless connection. So we have a WLAN. That WLAN reaches out to every one of the substations. And from those connections existing at the substations, we bring in at least 3 cameras at each substation for security. They're access cameras, they're pretty high quality, and we record that at the police station on servers there. Those connections are, from our experience, up and down all the time. So we're hoping with the fiber optics, we bring some stability to those features. So in addition to that, there's been plan or thought or communication between Gary and I mostly about including some kind of other kinds of security, like intrusion detection or other things. We haven't looked at it for quite some time, but there are that. In addition to that, with our AMI, there will be a need to have those data collector locations. Of course, the substations aren't all optimally located for those data locations, so we may have to have some others in addition to where the substations are. But I think there's enough reason to put fiber in those substations that the benefit is there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So just a quick question on the SCADA system and what we're pulling. Do we currently have the capability to, I mean, I've seen the substations, but my recollection is we don't have the data on the other side. So nothing at all. Okay, and do we have
cameras in there, that's security, that's it.
Okay. And do we have, I can't remember if we have a plan I know we were looking at pulling some of that metering data off, but is there currently a plan to pull that, the breaker relay information back to your main connection?
We're hoping to do with this project too, yeah, is get all that capability.
So you'll roll that so that you can pull all the meters as well into this scope, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect, thank you.
So what is the timing on this? Or is this something you plan to accomplish in this coming budget year?
Yes.
And there's money already in there for it?
It would require an amendment to the budget, but as we've, I think, talked with Jordan on preparing this model that you've been discussing, there's that AMI piece, and I think we've kind of tried to roll that into that same number, so we have a preliminary budget to start planning for that. But it would require official action by the council to amend the budget to accommodate that.
Now, that would go strictly under the power budget, or would that affect
we think
the
so.
general
We think the
fund?
bulk of it really is a power expense, and our plan would be to have it part of the power utility. And as Ryan's mentioned, there are certain other benefits to city operations. We have some weak points with our police officers with their in-car camera, or not cameras, but their laptops, I guess. And we think we can use the system to bolster that and help them. So yes, there are definite benefits to the power utility, but we think there are lots of other benefits for the city as well. But the bulk of it would be for the power utility.
So who will maintain it once it's up?
I think that's what we'd have to determine. as we.
Because, yeah, if we go
get it
turnkey, somebody, Wasatch, Cache Valley, somebody's just
we
gonna hand it
probably have
to
to
us
contract
We
with
would have
someone.
to maintain a relationship with somebody.
with somebody.
Right, whoever it is. I think there's a number of good companies out there. I've maintained a relationship over the last 12 years with Cache Valley Electric. I don't think that they're the least expensive company out there. I've been really impressed with Americom, with our police station project. They were amazing to work with. So I think there's a number of companies out there that can support us. I think it's just a matter of maintaining a relationship with those companies.
So would we pay them a retainer?
I don't think that we would need to pay them retainer.
Just maybe have them on call
Just
if we
have-
call
just-
and they,
Just have a relationship,
sure.
have them on call. Yeah.
We don't have many problems with our system now.
We haven't had any fiber optic problems in the 12 years we've had this installed.
But that's just been between buildings, right?
That's just been between buildings.
So we're talking
Yeah.
300 yards, 400
Well,
yards?
it's the operations center as
We're
well.
talking, it's over a mile of fiber.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're right, this installation will be an additional 8 miles, 8.5 miles actually. So it's not a small project in comparison to what we have currently. So we will probably need to at least maintain some vigilance and find good people that can help us maintain it.
Now, would this be a system that residents will be able to build off of eventually, or are we setting up for that, or what's the
That's a really
long?
good question. We really haven't answered that question with our discussion. Right now, it's just been, how are we gonna connect the substations to the existing network? But Shane and I have a meeting tomorrow with, I don't know who it is, somebody, and we will be discussing that very issue. There is a possibility that we could run fiber in parallel and deliver that to another company, or sell it to another company, or lease it to another company to deliver fiber to the home. But we don't know what that looks like. We're learning.
Right.
I think our biggest concern is bringing data back from these key locations that we have at the substations.
Yeah.
And is that gonna, I might have missed it, is it overhead or underground that you're planning?
So the lengths of line, the paths that we would have to follow would have to go both overhead and underground in different cases. So for example, down 50 West, you have a long string of overhead, and then as you get to the Utah State, yeah, that property, the Botanical Center, right, it goes underground for a section, and then it pops back up and goes all the way to the substation, and then we have the crossing between Burton and the park.
Because my recommendation would just be is anytime you go underground, you want to just make sure you put spare conduits in, spare raceways.
Yeah, I agree. As
so
I've talked to some of the contractors, as I've kind of prepped myself for this, they've talked to me about different kinds of cable, the kind you wrap. I don't know the names of them, but the kind you wrap on the line, or the kind you have a steel cable and it's encased with like a figure-8 situation. And then there's other things you can do where you can run microduct and then have multiple conduits on a line. I don't know. There's so many options in that. That's why we really need to have an engineer involved and draft us up a plan.
Okay. Any other questions, comments?
No, I just am curious what the cost is going to be.
Just,
We have two.
just running the numbers right now,
Yeah.
just the cable alone is gonna be about $80,000. So you figure material is 10% of the job.
Yeah, okay.
And in addition, I think your easements are going to be really difficult and long lead, so I'd be curious, crossing through UDOT's properties, and that's why you want to make sure, you put conduits in when you're in there, so.
Prior to this, getting bids from the engineers, I did reach out to several contractors and just kind of got ideas of what the cost was going to be. I reached out to four different companies. One was Utopia, and Utopia came back and said that they would install a fiber optic ring for $250,000. So I think that might be, I don't know what that means, honestly. But we wouldn't own the fiber. We would participate in the ownership. Not sure exactly why. I'm not convinced that that's the best way for the city to go. But that was an option. Another option with I reached out to Americom, and Americom actually came back really expensive. It was $450,000.
Wow.
So I think there's quite a broad range in prices there, and another reason why we need an engineer to design and go out to bid.
Yeah,
Just real quick, how much is the engineering fee?
Well, the engineering costs, or one was $10,000 and one was $15,000 for the engineering costs.
And then I would strongly recommend somebody looking at, and I think Sean offered to do some of that connection piece, but if I remember right, some of those breakers don't have the data. So were we planning to change breakers out as well and relays?
Yeah, that's in
Okay.
it's in our 5-year plan.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and following up on that metering, I did get some information back, and I know how to turn them on and program them and help you guys to collect the data. I'm just gotten a little bit distracted, so I'll get back to it.
I just wanted to throw you the assist back if you're interested.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, concerns?
I have a comment, and I don't know if this was discussed prior, but had we also looked at possibility of doing an RF link instead of fiber?
We currently have an RF link. Like I said, we have a backhaul from the operations center that's connected the fiber to the rest of our backbone. But it's a backbone up to the mountain tower, and from the mountain tower we have connections to parks and also the substations. It's very disappointing how it works. So it hasn't been a very robust, reliable system for us. I'm sure that part of the problem might be that we haven't spent, the buku bucks that radios can be, but I think the maintenance of those are long term not a really good option for what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Perfect. Last items on that. So thank you guys. We appreciate you coming out and sharing.
Thanks.
Next topic, I'm going to turn the time over. Appreciate Jordan updating most of our, I know there's a few outstanding items still, but
Yeah.
appreciate you updating everything that you have. And I think if we can just turn the time over to you and you can run us through where we were, just pick up from last time.
Yeah, sure. So we had, and if this has a battery message pop up, I don't think I can reach this outlet behind me, so if we happen to have any extension cord, if we have one, that'd be great.
I was going to.
Maybe that could be a goal. We could see if we could get through this before the battery comes up. So, yeah, we left off with some outstanding questions from last time, and I had the opportunity to sit down with Dean and Cammie from the finance department and work through a few of the things we had questions on. One of the big ones was how to treat non-operating revenues. And before if you remember, I was bringing in all of those and offsetting the revenue requirement with those non-operating revenues, just under the theory that if we're bringing in revenue through these other kinds of fees and things, that's revenue we won't have to collect in the rates. But in talking, I think Alan brought this up, and in talking with Dean, it sounds like that's actually put towards our ongoing capital and maintenance items. And in our 5-year capital plan, there was a $750,000 ongoing amount in there every year. And it sounds like the right treatment is to kind of exclude those when we're talking about designing these rates. So the only non-operating revenue now that I'm bringing in is just some, I'll pull it up here. These highlighted pieces I'm excluding, and I'm just bringing in, sorry, it's a little small on the screen, but our interest income, we have some miscellaneous items and interest expense. So those are pretty small. It's not a material amount. The really large items we get from non-operating revenue are really set aside for capital expenditures, and so I'm excluding those from this calculation, if that makes sense. So that's the first big change, and I think that was one of the questions we had last time we went through the model.
So refresh my memory, that was like 900,000, right, before?
Yeah, so it's just right off the finance statements. I'm going to scoot this over so we can see the tabs, but the total was 937,000.
Okay.
And so there's a pretty significant amount, 902,000, that's really there just to collect our ongoing capital from, growth and other things. If you look at the 5-year plan, we've kind of got the 750,000 assumed amount going forward, and that's really, so the revenue we collect is really just meant to be a one-for-one offset of these kind of growth capital needs. So I'm not bringing in the full amount anymore into that revenue requirement.
Okay.
So that's 34,000 reduction rather than a 900,000 reduction.
Gotcha.
The other big change was related to UAMPS. So UAMPS had sent out a budget update for the upcoming year, and it was quite a bit higher than we had before. It was 9.6 million. And in the prior financial statements, I think we had 8.9. And so it was a pretty big increase from where we were at. That kind of didn't make sense to me that there would be that large of an increase, but in doing a little more research, I think Dean found that it was actually our financial books that were understated a bit, and really in 2016 it should have been 9.6. So really year over year there's not a big change. It was just I had a lower number for 2016 than I should have. So there's not a big change there. It was just me pulling in an understated number to begin with, and when I fix that, the year over year change isn't. That's about where you would expect it should be. The downside is it's higher than we originally were looking at. So with that change, it's resulting in an impact on the typical customer of about 4%, where before we were hoping to try to be flat. But so that's the other big change in the revenue requirement side. Any questions on that? Let me show you the financial statements background, and you can see what I'm talking about here. So in 2016, the UAMPS comes in under the purchases line of our financial statements. And if I go back to 2014, we were around 9.4 million. It jumps up to rounding up to about 9.5 in 2015. And then our 2016, it was at 8.9. And you can tell right away that that wouldn't make a lot of sense for 2016 to just all of a sudden be that low. So that was a bad number that we had in the model. So the updated budget is 9.6. So it's just kind of following a consistent trend going forward. So in the forecast now we're up to 9,665,000.
What is that percentage between year over year?
Let me grab that here. Take this over this. That's kind of getting lost in the rounding here. Let me subtract 1 from that. So it's actually pretty flat going from our booked 16 to what they've sent us as their most recent forecast. It was 1.6% increase the year before and just about 1% the year prior to that. So
perfect, thank you.
Let's see. The rest of the revenue requirement, there was another change. We talked about the capital reserves, and prior to the last meeting, I had included we're trying to catch up on some capital reserves over time, and I had allocated that up to generation and transmission, but UAMPS holds a balance for us in capital reserves. And so the amount that we're trying to collect is really just for the distribution piece. So I'm now allocating that only to our distribution functions. So it will hit the customer charge and then the volumetric rates and distribution. So that's the 280,000. So that was a slight change. The other small change was lighting. I've broken out separately now. Prior, it was just all kind of rolled into the distribution, so I'm breaking that out separate. It's 159,000 of our total $14.7 million amount, so it's not a huge material change, but it's more correct to break lighting out separate into its own class, so that's one change there. So any questions on those changes? That's I think that's all the revenue requirement specific changes to come up with our 14.7 million that we're at today.
Is that adding the lights, or is that for the power for the lights?
This is just breaking out the distribution into two separate buckets. So the 159,000 is what we expect to collect from the city for lighting the streets and public areas. So prior to that, this 3.7 million was kind of all lumped in together. And then I was allocating it between the three big classes, residential, commercial, and industrial. Now if we scroll down, I've broken out street lights separate from these three. So the 159 right here is kind of on its own line. So they'll have their own specific rates as a separate class,
Awesome.
which is
The right way.
a more correct way to do that. So, all right, super exciting so far. Moving on down, let's see, not much has changed with the customer's charge. Just the accountant in me likes to make sure things tie and whatnot. So the customer charge for each class has been designed so that we collect the total amount we're putting into our customer bucket up here above. So we've got 1.1 million here that ties exactly to 1.1 down here. And that's if we use these customer charge, $7.76 for residential, $31.87 for commercial, and $82.74 for industrial. I'm rounding those off, so we end up with just nice flat customer charges. And then the difference that we will not be collecting because of the rounding, we're just rolling down into the volumetric rates. So that's how that's working. Not a lot changed there. And down here on the volumetric rates, the only real change as far as methodology goes is just having street lights and area lights in their own customer class. And other than that, all of this math works the same. We're just allocating the revenue requirement to each class based on kilowatt hours and load total and the peak window. So then we've got our customer charge coming down, and the accountant in me likes to see this 14.7 million here that we would collect if kilowatt usage was this amount. 14.7 matches exactly with the 14.7 up here we're after. So
Are you planning on splitting the commercial, large and small?
yeah, we've talked about that, and I think we're working with the city to make sure we get the metrics we need to be able to do that. We talked about doing it based on either demand or the meter, whether it's single phase or three phase. So there's different ways we could do that, but we haven't gotten that analysis done yet. So I think we're just kind of compiling data.
Yeah, I think that's one of the issues we wanted to at least address. We probably have several commercial accounts that are very typical to residential accounts as far as usage. So I think we'd have some kind of cutoff, 5 kW or something demand, and just roll those commercial accounts into the residential rate. Maybe we don't call it residential, we call it general service rate or something like that, but we could identify those small commercial and roll them into that other rate. Is that kind of what we talked about?
Yeah, we talked about rather than creating a whole new class, just kind of renaming the residential class general service, and then some of your small commercial that really is kind of like a large residential as far as total usage, you could just kind of roll in and call it general service. And you'd have some residential and some small commercial in the same class. The only downside with that is the load factor may look different. So I don't know how material that would be because you don't have a whole lot of commercial customers you're talking about, but.
Yeah, typically a commercial customer has a demand charge as well, and residential not.
Right.
So there is a difference there. And I'm not sure it's a good fit. I think you'd be better off with a separate rate, but.
Separate small commercial rate?
Yes.
Well, I think there would be both. I think there would be really small commercial that would roll into the general service, and then probably a small commercial and large commercial is kind of what I envision.
Okay.
So I think what we're pending on right now is just compiling all the commercial data, just looking at the total kilowatt hour usage of the total demand, just kind of looking at those, and then we can come put those before everybody and talk about what's a logical kind of split and how do we want to design those classes. So that's a pending issue. Got a thumbtack in that one.
With the fixed costs, I would think it would be determined on whether it's just, 240 single phase versus 3-phase. Having that just be the classification. Otherwise, they would just look like a residential customer that uses a lot of power and uses it throughout the day where it's not really impacting the grid that much.
Some do, some
Some
don't.
do. So I guess how do we determine, in other utilities, how do they determine the demand charge if they're just using a single phase system like that?
The demand charge is based off the rate schedule.
It's anybody that uses up to 8 they don't get charged for it. They only get charged after they exceed 8 kW.
So any time in the day they're using more than 8 kilowatts, they get a demand charge?
For the whole month, on any business, on any demand meter, the highest 15-minute interval throughout the whole month, that meter holds that. So we have to have the capacity to feed them.
I think half the residential customers could fall into that.
And typically, your kilowatt hour charge is different for residential because you're blending that in. But for a small commercial, then you have a demand charge, but their kilowatt hour charge is less.
Is less, okay. Yeah, you throw in an air conditioner and a clothes dryer and you're almost 10 kilowatts right there.
Yeah. So there's kind of a short-term view and the long-term view. I think over the long run, we'd want to get a more specific class and work towards that. We may even be able to roll it into the general service class pretty soon as well. But for purposes of what we're doing currently, my current plan, and tell me what you guys feel like you want to have done soon, but I thought let's start with our current structure the way it is, the way the bill is currently designed, with the kilowatt hour charge, the demand charge, the customer charge. And then I was planning on just looking at what would the current revenue be today from commercial customers and how much our cost of service comes up with. We have 4.9 million that we hope to collect from customers. So you'd expect to see a deficiency there and basically come up with what the percentage increase to our current structure would have to be. So you do a percentage increase to the demand charge, the KWH charge, to get to where you need to be to kind of make up that deficiency. So that's kind of the quicker route, just saying we're going to keep the current structure of the bill the same. We're just going to kind of percentage increase it up to what we need. If we want to do kind of the longer analysis, which I think we do either way, but as far as how long we want to wait to make a solution recommendation, we could try to change that structure and create a new class and mess around with that. So I guess it's just what is our goal? What do we want to have in place before we make a recommendation? The quickest route is to just do a percentage increase, and the longer route is to wait until we have the structure all defined before we make any kind of recommendation. So I don't know how people feel about that.
I would like to see us implement a customer charge rather than a percent increase on kilowatt hour charge. But
Yeah.
that customer charge for commercial, you'll have every one of your small commercials beating the door down because that's huge. That won't work for the commercial.
What do you typically see on a commercial customer charge?
Smallest probably around 10 or 15.
Okay.
So it sounds like we probably want to get the class broken apart first before we implement the customer
Yeah,
charge.
I think we would need to.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that, to that note as well, I think that, if you scroll up to your variable costs, on your kilowatt hours, I'd be curious to see what on your UAMPS variable costs, I'd be surprised if a lot of that's not from the demand charges from your commercial customers, because they're all spiking your air conditioners in those summer months. So I would be curious if we have a breakout between residential and commercial customers to see, what their peaking demands are, because I think that would be your biggest charge and what we're paying the most for.
Yeah, and I think the council, what we would like to see is a complete breakdown and
Final
rather
product.
do it that way and rather than drag it on.
steps.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And it may not be too difficult to come up with those lines, so that's something that we can work through. And
We're currently working on that. We're looking at all commercial customers and trying to segregate them, segment on, who's small and who's big and what's the normal pattern for a breakout. Was it 10 kW, was it 15 kW? Tammy, our accountant, is currently working on that. And I think within the next 7 to 10 days, we should have something.
okay, great.
I just pulled up Rocky Mountain Power's. They're on their small, which is, it's under 30 kW. They have a general service distribution voltage. Their customer charge is $54.
Okay. Is that Schedule 23 you're looking at?
Huh?
Are you looking at Schedule 23 or Schedule 6?
6.
Okay, so there's two, Schedule 6, 6A, 6B, I guess there's 4, 6, 6A, 6B, and then there's Schedule 23. So the two that I think that fit us the most is Schedule 23, which I believe is under 25 kW, has a high kWh, which is right around 9-10 cents a kilowatt hour, and then a lower demand charge. And then Schedule 6 is going to be right around 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour, with about a $13 per kW. And then if we have
Actually, well, their KW charge is $14.62, and then they charge a $4 on top of that facilities charge, so their demand charge is $18 a kW for every kW.
That's right. And then in addition, if you go from 1 megawatt, then what happens is if you have a customer that's over a megawatt, then you jump into Schedule 8, which then increases the rate on top of that. So the demand charge is even raised. But I think if we use those as a skeleton, I think we have to get the full answer. I think we have to look at the commercial side and see how we want to handle that piece. Okay. So if you go back just real quick, Jordan, on the notes, I know we were taking on your notes tab. I know we were taking notes. Is it okay if we just kind of highlight the ones or cross out the ones as we go through those? I think because that's the list we created when we were going through it.
Yeah.
Can we just add to the bottom of that as we go through and just say, customer charge for commercial, and it may already be in there.
Yeah, at the very bottom, large versus small. Scroll down,
Right
27.
here.
Yeah, so I just would like to, maybe if we started with this list and then show us in the model what has changed, I think that way we can just keep this list going, if that's okay.
Yep. No, that's a good way to do it. Absolutely. So we wanted to bring in an 8760 data specifically for solar customers and compare it. I think that's one that's still outstanding, so we can do that. I think, Brock, you mentioned that you can get that data.
Yeah, so do we want to model that as a megawatt system? Is that how you guys want to model it? I can run a PV syst on everything south facing, 25 degrees. That would get us close. Is that what you guys want to do, or do you want to get more granular, or how do you guys want to handle that piece?
Well, we could look at, you know, due south is the ideal on a customer perspective, but, yeah, I don't know how we would, maybe we could look at a sample of solar customers and say, what's the average orientation, and just kind of model it on that, or, I don't know.
You tell me, and we can get the model and we can play with the model, and I can run it. However, I can do shading, we can do not shading, pick one house, we can pick multiple houses.
Now you're talking about south versus west facing, whether we should have two separate for higher demand time versus not so high demand time.
So yeah, so I think the best way to think of this solar piece on the 8760 is we have, from UAMPS, we have 6 customers, or 6 resources, and we actually have I'm calling it, I don't know if it's true, but how I would view it is we have a 7th customer, and that's the people that have solar today. And so we're just trying to put that into the model, and what I'm wondering is it a fair assumption for me to just say, take all of those, just call it one system, due south, and it, you know, do we deal with the fact that, you know, some of them are going to be facing west, some are facing east? You know, is that a fair way, or do you want me to break it up in half? What would you guys recommend? And then we'd plug that in as one customer.
So I can show you what I've got in here, and then, you know, tell me how we'd like to change this. But on the, let's see, on the Schedule A, I think is what we're calling our first proposal. We've got some solar metrics in here, and so these are shown monthly. So that's where you're losing some of that detail. If you're looking at it hourly, you might come up with a different answer than if you're kind of netting everything on a monthly basis. But I think in our current state, that's probably what we'd do, right? Is we'd be netting it on a monthly basis. So I think for our current analysis, it makes sense to me to do this monthly. But what I've got in here, let's go down to the solar, is our first proposal. I've got a 7 cent rate, pretty much 7.4 cent credit for the net metering, the excess generation. And that's basically, if I look at our time of use proposal that we would ultimately move towards, I said if a customer produces 15% of their total production during the peak hour, and that might be high, that might not be realistic, so that's where I'd lean on you and John to see if that's realistic. But if they were to do that, their bill would be $274 a year. And so basically my thought was, you've got some customers that are generating more at a more opportune time, like during peak, and some who aren't generating any. And so if we were to just pick an average number, you would almost be penalizing the customers who are doing better. And so I thought, what's a fair way to do it? Let's assume, let's take the favorable case, the 15% case, and for the next 2 years or whatever it is before we have smart meters, when we can dial it in more specifically, we're going to give customers the benefit of the doubt and say, you know, some customers produce 15% during the peak hour. So we're going to kind of, in the short term, say that's the impact that we're going to start with. And then when we move to time of use rates and we actually can measure the exact production, if you're doing worse than that, then your bill would go up at that time. But for this kind of, this first step, we don't know for sure, right? So do we want to assume that everyone's average, or do we want to kind of assume everyone's doing, you know, the better case? I guess it's just kind of a philosophy. So what I have currently in here is I'm assuming this is the impact if you were producing 15% during the peak hour. And it would raise everyone's bill, or that particular customer's bill, to $274 a year. And that's what I've got in here for a starting point. So that's where the 7 cents came from. Does that make sense? How I did that?
So I think there's two things here that we have
Yeah.
to analyze, right? And I think that there's how does it affect a customer? And that's what I think you have here is, if I have a 7 kW system, what is the impact on us? And I think that's a good clarity to make, that we don't have the smart meters to start charging, demand side, that's, I think, where we want to head. And I think that's in the budget as well. So we definitely can't bill that rate. But I think that there's two ways to look at this is, how does the solar customer get affected, which is what I think you're presenting. But the other thing that I think we have to look at with 8760 is, how does all of our resources that we're currently taking, we have 6 resources that we're pulling from, we actually have to view solar as a 7th customer that we're buying from, because that's exactly what we're doing with this. And with that 7th customer, we have to see if there's essentially the net benefit back to the grid, electron flow, not mathematical flow. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
Could you do 2 simulations, maybe one south-facing and one west-facing?
So just right now, what I can tell you, so if you just take what you just did on the sun hours, I just ran a simulation on a 7 kW at my house, and I can just read you the sun hours if you want to plug that in for a due south.
Sure.
And that'll give you what it is. So it's 2.76 for January, 3.9 for February, 4.84. April's 5.72.
Let's see, I'm assuming I'm on the right month. 5.72.
Yeah.
Okay.
7.02 for May, 7.26 for June, 7.55 for July, August is 7.22, September 6.16, October is 4.94, November's 3.31, and December's 2.27.
So these are the sun hours per day?
They're the average sun hours per day.
Okay, and you missed the third one down was 4.84. Should have a 4 on that.
So that's due south, and then I'll run a 7 kW west real quick.
So this is this taking into account weather? Or is this just because of the angle of the sun and the number of hours the sun's up?
Yeah, so that's both. What it does is it takes into effect the historical weather data of what it sees, and then it plugs what the average sun hours are. So it takes the 2.76, which is how many hours of 100% sunlight that you would get. So a solar panel is rated at 1,000 watts per meter squared at 77 degrees Fahrenheit. And so what it does is it says, in January, I can assume that for 2.76 hours every day, I'm going to see those conditions. And that's how it's rating the production. So then what it does, and that's per an area. So you take your watts per meter squared, which is 1,000 watts per meter squared times 2.76. So what I'm saying is if you take the 7 kW times by your 2.76, you would essentially get 14.76, here, let me do it, kilowatt hours per day. Let me tell you what that would be.
It's actually a bell curve, but this kind of lumps it all in as if it's a step function.
7 times 2.6.
But what I'm saying is, that's the average hours per day, but what if you have an inversion, or if you have a 3-day snowstorm, or snow sitting on your panel for a week?
That's correct. Yeah. So what this would do is just be your average, taking all of the, every January 1st, all the months or all the days in January, it averages them together. So this would not take into consideration
Any loss from weather?
Yeah, it wouldn't be real-time data. So it wouldn't tell you January 1st we lost, 10%, it's just taking the average. You are taking the loss for weather, but you're averaging it together over the years. So you're not getting it, you know, you're not saying I lost a week for inversion or a week for snow. It's saying, you know, in 2016 I lost a week for snow, but I'm averaging that out, and that's how I'm getting the 2.76. And it goes back, the data goes back as far as we have weather data.
So it's the average for the month over several years, where like this last May was like the best May I've ever experienced in 6 years, which was just an anomaly, but it wouldn't be the average.
But to your point,
And February was terrible.
the better the weather data that you can project, the better this model can give you. So all of these models are based off of what's called a TMY file. And what that does is that takes so much weather history. And so I'm pulling from a TMY in Salt Lake City at the airport, which pulls all the airport data. So Kaysville will have a little bit of delta, but the closest weather data file that we have is Salt Lake, or we can pull in from Clearfield area, but those aren't as reliable. And what that means is the accuracy of the sensors aren't as good as the airport. So right now, most people would pull the airport data and say that that's close enough on those. So that's what I would expect a 7 kW system to do due south at, and I put a 20-degree slope is what I put.
So do you have any idea how much of that would occur between 5 and 9, for example?
Yeah, so I can give you that. I can export the hourly data.
Okay.
And then we can
Then we can see
overlay
what the
that
percentage,
piece.
because I've just kind of assumed a percentage of production here. I've heard south doesn't produce as late, obviously, as west.
Correct.
Which makes sense. So, so that's the question. So if south were to say not produce anything during the peak, and I just zero that out, a customer who's producing what you just described would pay $284 more than, or $284 a year total under the time of use rate.
Did that
That
number
makes
change
sense.
when you zeroed those out?
Yeah, that changed. If I bring it back and say they're producing some during the
Okay.
peak, well, that doesn't make sense. So I'm gonna have to look into how this, John and I might need to, John helped me program this particular tab, and I'm not sure if it's programmed to be able to just change these sun hours on the fly and have everything flow correctly.
So I think the PV production from 5 to 9 p.m. was based on the other sun hours that were in there,
Yeah,
which kind of had, which was actually based on my array, my data that we pulled, the historical data, and so it's assuming a south and west array, combined south array and west array.
so we've got 7 kilowatt multiplied by the sun hours times 31 to come up with our total PV production, I think. And then I was just taking a percentage and allocating that to 5 to 9, but let's put a pin in that. I don't know if I can effectively model what we're talking about here on the spot, but
Okay.
I think that was right though, because when you took out PV production for the evening, the total bill went up because
that
the
makes
value of
sense.
solar is higher in the evening. So I think that's
that
good.
does, yeah, so theoretically it makes sense. So if we zero this out and say, hey, none of this is happening between 5 and 9, the bill's $284. If you're producing 2,000 of your 13,000 between 5 and 9, it's only $93. So that's under the time of use. What's that?
So you're getting a credit.
So you do get a
value.
higher credit in the peak hour.
That's right. So let me just make sure I understand my task. Sorry, that's kind of why I got off on
Yeah,
this
no,
tangent.
that'd be good.
You would like me to model you an 8760 for 7 kW facing south and facing west. Is that accurate?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that'd be
Okay.
great.
That's what I needed to know. So that's perfect.
And what that'll give us is this column AO here, I will be able to put in the model that you come up with. And if we have a west-facing array that's smaller or larger than this, what I would propose is that we use the west-facing array as kind of our first step. And whatever the increase that comes up with, we come up with a rate. Right now I have 7 cents, but that's how much we credit to solar customers during, it's basically just to mimic what it would be for a west-facing customer.
Sure.
This is more anecdotal evidence, but considering that the majority of the city, especially the East Kaysville, is so close to the mountain, I would think that arrays would want to gravitate more south or west because the production on the east facing is just not going to be as high. The production is going to be clipped by the mountain until 9 or 10 in the morning. So I think modeling it more towards a southwest or west would be a more
What
accurate
customers
way to go.
currently are incentivized to do, right?
Yeah.
You're not a commission salesman, are you? I've seen north-facing installs
Really?
all over the place, so.
Yeah. So, once I get
Put 'em
that
in the
from you,
basement
I'll
for that
update
matter.
this tab. And under this scenario, let's see. With your sun hours here, this is basically saying a customer who can produce a portion during the peak hour is paying $93. If I go back over here and just plug it in, and we'll say, well, it's okay. I think we've already seen that, but it goes up when that's not occurring. So let's start with that. Send me those hours, and then I'll plug it in here and make sure that the model's working the way it should. So.
Okay.
Bottom line, for
We'll follow up.
clarity, this data will affect the credit that we give solar customers. That's what it's gonna do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Correct.
Eventually, when we have a time of use capability.
Well, both. So what I would start with is we've got to assume some profile, some customer profile, because we don't know what everyone's house is specifically, right? And so what do you want to start with as your assumption? What kind of customer profile do you start with saying, hey, I think everyone has a south-facing array, and in that case, everyone's going to be paying more. But if a customer has a west-facing array, they'd be paying less. And so I guess it depends on, over this short term, 2 or 3 years before we have AMR, where do you want to assume? And I'm saying, since we don't know and we don't have the data, I lean towards assuming kind of the benefit of the doubt. We'll come up with a profile if they're west-facing, and that's the rate we're going to come up with, so they'd pay that bill. And then ultimately, once AMR comes on, and you know exactly what it is, then customers who are producing less than that would see their bills go up more at that time. Does that make sense? That might be a little generous in the next 2 or 3 years to say, hey, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say you're producing as a west-facing array. But I personally would feel better about doing that than say we're going to assume everyone's south and then kind of penalize those who aren't. So I guess either way you're kind of assuming something, right?
I think the percentage is probably 98% facing south, because it's like, say, that model works for the customer, so very few west.
Yeah, and that's fair. So if
But then
currently-
houses don't all face south. They're going to have to go on what their house is existing, and which is why you see some facing east and west, and apparently even north.
You're saying reality is that 98% of the homes in Kaysville face south. That's what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that that's where they put the arrays, the biggest percentage by far, yes.
That's where they try to convince people to put them.
Right.
That's right.
If that's your assumption, then it's saying
Yeah.
that 2% of those customers would
the
end
most
up over
energy-
the next 2 or 3 years paying more than maybe they should. But it's so small that we're willing to do that. And I don't, if everyone feels comfortable with that, it seems to me, and I have more limited knowledge, but it seems to me that there's a lot of customers that just put it based on where they want it to be on their roof. So if their house is facing east and their back roof is on the west, that's where they'll put them. If their house faces north and their back of their house is on the south. I know my wife doesn't want to have solar panels facing the street because she doesn't like the way they look. But like you say, the salespeople aren't necessarily guiding them to put it in the most productive way. So you're currently incentivized to do it all south, but I don't know that I would leap to 98%, but.
Truthfully, I think in this market, and it's all cash flow basis, I think that you'll see them north, you'll see them south, you'll see them east, you'll see them west, southwest, south, ground mounts, you know, canopies, everything. So I think if we just get the variables, I'll give you a south and a west. It's about 10 to 15% delta, and then maybe we just take the average of the two and then just use that.
Say we'll kind of split the baby and say we're assuming southwest.
That's right.
Kind of
And that'll give us
somewhere in the
our
middle.
our case to start with.
And then that'll be very favorable to the northeast facing customers.
That's right.
That's a start.
They won't be impacting the grid anyway.
That's right.
And that sounds fair to me. So once we have that specific scenario, a southwest kind of, we can do an average and see
Okay,
what the
I'm
rate would be.
downloading them. So.
Awesome.
Okay, so
All
if
right.
you'll click back to the notes, sorry to
Yep.
make sure we're there. There you go.
So I'm going to put, as a kind of a sub-note here,
Yeah, put an action for me. That's perfect.
actually, it's just a K, right?
Yeah, I'm from Carbon County.
To remember that. So. Excuse me. No, I can't have a subtraction. So I'll put in here, Schedule A is what we're calling our short-term schedule, or immediate schedule. We'll assume southwest facing array. So that's what I'll model in there. As long as we're doing action items, I'm gonna just throw in here for Dean. Send, what do we want to call it, demand metrics for the commercial customers. Okay. All right, we talked about considering a cap for solar capacity per customer. I think last time where we left off is we liked the idea of maybe a percentage of the last year's total usage. I'm not sure if we came to a conclusion on that. Any thoughts on that?
I like the idea of just a percentage of their last year's consumption, or if they're a new residents, they for the first year, they say, we estimate we're going to use this much, we're going to consume this much, and then the following year, well, it might already be installed by then. We'd have to just go off an assumption if they're a new customer. But if it's a store like a Smith's, that's going to be pretty similar from one to the next. So they could pull data from an actual store or a Maverick, something like that.
Yeah. So does it 90% sound like a fair, do you want it to be closer or farther from the actual consumption?
You say 90% of the demand power?
Yeah.
Do you want it based on demand or kilowatt hours?
I would think demand, because if they're, because really, what is the whole concern of this? Of, you know, they might consume a ton of power. Excuse me. They might consume a ton of power just during a certain time of day, where it's really hurting the grid, especially if it's a peak period. Or maybe it's just like 15,000 watts 24/7. I think about Smith's with all their freezers. You know, they might say they want a megawatt of solar, and it wouldn't really impact the grid at all if it's a fraction of their total consumption.
So the only problem I see with that currently is I don't know that we can measure the previous year's demand for residential customers currently.
We
Can we?
don't have that.
I don't think we have
Don't
that
have that.
ability, but
Not for
maybe,
residential.
maybe over the long run, we recognize that that's the ideal when we have the tools to do it. And to start now, we look at total KWH as kind of a starting point.
So residential, is it 15 kilowatts is the cap right now? I get choked up talking about this topic. My only concern about having a cap so high is if you have multiple customers on the same substation, distribution transformer. And, you know, if it's a 50 kilowatt transformer and you have 5 customers and they're all back feeding 15 kilowatts, you're gonna burn up your transformer. And so it almost, and it wouldn't happen every time, and it would only be very certain times of the day that would happen. Probably like, you know, and not every time, not every day of the year either. It's gonna be in the spring most likely, you know, 10 a.m., 11 a.m. when they're not home, and then their solar is just doing amazing.
Yeah.
And just off my personal experience, there's days where I'm not using much power, and it's back feeding a lot. You know.
So how many customers usually, on average, share a transformer?
I think it's 4, correct?
4?
3 to 4.
So if all 4 houses happen to have the scenario John's talking about, then you could run into that, needing to upgrade the transformer.
So 4 per, are you putting 25s on those or 15 or how big?
No, we do actually 6 residents for 50 kVA.
Okay.
TV.
So 8.3 kW. So that's peak.
How are those, like, it's a 50 kV transformer, but how long could they exceed that? You know, if it's just, excuse me, if it's just going on for, you know, 20 minutes or something, could the transformer handle 60 kV backwards? And, or, you know, I think with the oil field, there is a little bit of wiggle room. They can surge, you know, a little bit.
Continuous duty is defined by the National Electrical Code. That's anything longer than 3 hours. And so anything longer than 3 hours, which isn't in the National Electrical Code, but because we're on the utility side.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, we'd have to take the 50 kVA times 80% to get us. So 40 kVA would be what you rated at if you had a load on for over 3 hours.
Okay.
So if we had that, if those scenarios on the 8760, you know, the trick part is do we have the load data to offset that? Because that's the variable we don't have, right? Is what is their load usage?
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, what it's saying is if we were to put it at, you know, 40 kVA would be if it was on for 3 hours. Is
Mm-hmm.
what the NEC would define that as. I think to your point, I think current design is based off of kilowatt hours. So most people don't look at the grid at all. They just base it off of kilowatt hours. Rocky Mountain Power's cap is 25 kW
For residential?
for residential.
Wow. That's huge.
The maximum that they allow, anything above 10 kW, they allow or you don't need to even put a disconnect at the meter main. So you can just tie it into any panel you want if it's below 10 kW. So those are the kind of the breaks that Rocky Mountain Power takes is 10 kW and 25 kW.
So my house is kind of a unique situation, but if a customer's going to have I have a 11.5 kilowatt array, but I'm charging cars with it, I'm heating with it in the wintertime, and I'm hot water and all just things that the average customer wouldn't be doing. Running the time machine, things like that. But if someone really needs a 15 kilowatt array for their house, then they've got some serious loads going on that they're gonna have to, they're gonna be drawing a lot of power too to kind of offset that, but it's just the risk of what if everything's off, they're on vacation at the time, and then, you know, it's that very small scenario that's gonna happen maybe once or twice a year for maybe a few hours or something in the morning in the springtime. You know.
Yeah.
Right.
So when we, the city first has to approve before an array gets installed, right? There's kind of that, and part of that review, I would assume, is looking at that particular scenario. Is that part of it? So if there's already two houses, do you look at the neighbors and say, hey, this might trip the transformer? Or
We haven't to this point, but that's.
that would
that's
that would
another
probably add a little bit of
process
cost
we need
to
add now that we're
analysis.
getting so many.
Yeah, and you may roll that analysis cost into the application fee to make sure, hey, we have to put our engineers on this, or we have to look at this and make sure we collect that in kind of an application fee. But I would assume that if it gets to the point where you realize, hey, we have to upgrade this because of this new solar array, you know, we maybe can track those costs, and Dean, you weigh in here, but is there a way in our accounting system to, when we have a capital expenditure for that in particular, we flag it, put it in a bucket specifically related to solar, and then when we're coming up with our 7-cent rate or whatever it is, we take into account those increasing capital costs and make sure that that's part of the cost and benefit analysis in the solar as we go along. So for example, for our base period in 2016, if we had been doing this, we could look at it and say, hey, we incurred, you know, $25,000 in capital to be able to accommodate solar. That $25,000 we're going to put into a specific solar-related bucket, and that's going to bring the credit down a little bit so that we're collecting that back from the solar customers. So currently, I kind of have the long-run cost savings in here, but there might be long-run cost increases that we want to make sure to be tracking as well related to that.
And I think how it's typically done, and I don't believe that you have it, correct me if I'm wrong, but usually what happens is when you file your net metering agreement, and again, this is different utilities, but you'll do a load flow analysis. I know we have all of our systems modeled with GPS, but we don't have a load flow analysis already done.
Limitation with an understanding that that's not it's happening very rarely, and then it pushes some responsibility to the people who operate it, to Bruce and Gary, to kind of monitor it as it comes online and manage it. It seems to me like that's the best path forward.
Yeah, since we don't have any data one way or another, I think just kind of, yeah, let's go 15 kVA or 15 kilowatt. And
that's where it's at now,
that's where
right?
It's at now.
So we just
That's
leave it
what's
as
been 2
is.
years, yeah.
Leave it
I
as
think it
is.
makes sense to leave it there, recognizing that people really aren't pushing it.
Okay.
And in the
So-
future, if it starts being a problem, we can readdress it and go,
Yeah,
you know, this
I
should be
think so.
12 or something.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
You haven't had any problems, right?
But
No, other than we need to, you know, find out exactly what that limit is on each distribution transformer that we're gonna allow.
That's right.
Brigham City has a study done, they only allow 20%. And it's not just for capacity on the transformer, it's for voltage disturbance and power quality, so we'll have to look at that a little closer.
what's the cost of upgrading a transformer?
It depends on what size it upgrades to.
Just say-
Upgrade to 75 from a 50 is probably $2,000, $2,500. The difference.
Really? Oh, the
That-
difference,
that's
so you would,
material cost, that's not labor
okay.
cost.
So going from one to the other would be 2,500 or 2,000? Okay.
Roughly around.
Plus labor and,
Well, that-
Yeah.
like I said, that's material, that's not labor.
Drink it.
So it's cheaper than a customer getting a power wall, per se.
Yeah, no worries.
You know?
So what action item should we give for that study? Do you want us to put it up here? Because I think that ties in with the smart meters per breaker, because right now we can't see what's on those breakers, right? We can if we go read them, but we can't see them real time, which ties to the fiber. So then now we're getting there as now we need that study to do that load flow analysis. So there's kind of dollar signs floating everywhere, but should we put that as somebody's gonna do that?
I can take samplings from the people in UAMS who have had it done. I mean, Brigham will let me see theirs and show me, you know, and we'll see, I can see who else has had it done. We'll kind of get a general idea where we should be.
Okay, so maybe like so we'll put that as an action item for you to find out what.
See where they're at in their,
and where it's
in their
at.
process.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so Bruce is there.
Okay.
And some of that that problem might be solved by setting a value of solar rate and paying them, you know, so much, not retail, for everything they put back online, because to date, they've been not worried about overbuilding and overproducing because they're getting retail for retail, so.
That's
you know,
right.
that might
Right.
kinda
So your incentivized is to use your own generation, and then beyond that, there's not as much of an incentive to put it back.
Yeah, I think that'll take care of some of
Right.
those people that are overbuilding.
Makes sense. Okay.
So I
Sorry.
guess I'm having a question. I mean, this addresses residential, but do we want to have a quicker discussion about commercial and a cap for them?
That's a good
Or what
question.
do we want to do about commercial?
It's a good question.
And, well, like I say, we haven't ever had a commercial net metered agreement, but like I told you, we have a few in town, a really large one that just went on down in West Kaysville there at Kays Creek Elementary. But that one, in my mind, is a different story. We don't do net metering. We do feed-in tariff and make them hook line side. So they get paid just like they're, you know, the generation plant, like you said, they get paid so much for every kilowatt hour they produce, but they pay retail for everything they use. And they're separate. It's not like on the house where it's hooked in the load side and they're using it internally and the meter's not going either way. So that's kind of the way I've told them that I thought that we were going to go with commercial. So
if we did that, and the only question that comes into play is if we set it a demand charge, then they're not going to receive the benefit on, as, you know, for example, a qualifying facility would receive a demand charge, and then we'd have to put a smart meter on there to monitor it for the 15-minute intervals. Do we do that, or would we want to do that, or how would we handle that piece?
I don't know, we'd have to think about it, but like I say, with the feed-in tariff, like I say, it's a different animal where you're hooking line side. They get paid so much for everything they produce, they pay retail for everything they use, and it seems to be, a lot of places are doing that.
Yeah.
On commercial, so.
But the commercial customers aren't typically gonna be happy with that.
Yeah, the school district didn't care, so.
But typically, I mean, the way we're doing it, not very many places do it that way, is that right? I mean, most
Right.
places.
The other ones are small and they're just being absorbed into them, really not even hardly affecting their, you know, their usage, so they're all small. The next biggest one we have is a 60 kW on the DATC Health building, and it doesn't even, you know, doesn't hardly do anything to their bill. They have such a large usage there, so
just so that everyone understands, make sure we understand. So you have a meter here. What he's saying is currently, if this is the house over here, he's saying that everybody ties in on this side. But if we put a demand charge, the meter's going to see the demand here. But if you tie it on this side, which is what he's doing, and he's setting a separate meter, and then he's just doing like we're saying, he's feeding it in both directions. He's saying that if you tie it in on this side, the commercial customer is going to be unhappy because they're not going to receive the benefit of the demand savings, which they would be if they were on the load side versus the line side.
Okay.
And so the line side, it could go either way, but I think it's a good question as far as, do we do a feed-in tariff? If we do, how do we handle the demand side piece? And that's going to go back to what our rates are.
Oh, and then if that commercial customer wanted to do battery storage to eliminate the demand entirely, it wouldn't benefit them at all, because they would still be charged the demand and the battery would be on the wrong side.
That's correct. That's correct. So if it goes back to how we handle the Schedule A, or Schedule 6, 6A, 6B, or the 23 that we put into place. If we put those in place, then we have to realize that this may or may not be the right way, depending on what we do with those rate schedules with commercial.
Okay.
Anyone know what, like Murray Power did with Costco? Because I know they had a huge, I think it was Costco. They wanted us to put a big solar array on the roof, and it was like a megawatt of solar or something like that.
All the one, I can talk to Blaine Hackey's the one that runs Murray, we can talk to him, but yeah, I can say it was, Hurricane has, no, Santa Clara had a big box store like that, put like 750 on it. They made them hook, line, side, and they only pay them 4 cents for everything they produce, so.
So I did the Ogden Costco. I don't believe Murray did Costco yet.
Yeah, I don't think it happened in Murray.
It didn't happen in Murray?
I'm pretty sure it
Think of
hasn't.
something
If I
else
did, I
then.
missed it, but.
Maybe I'm thinking IKEA then.
IKEA has a megawatt of solar on it. It's
Okay.
connected load side. Ogden Costco in Riverton has a 500 kW-ish system. It's connected load side. We did the Costco in Orem, and it has about the same, and it was connected load side. So most utility or most solar arrays are typically load side connected today in Utah.
And we've got, I know customers like Maverick, they approached, I remember them in a comment at a public hearing. They wanted to put in like 45 kilowatts on their canopies, their gas pump canopies. But at the time we were capping 15 kilowatt, and they said, you know what, it's not even worth going through the exercise then if it's going to be that small. And so, yeah, I don't.
So he is a resident. The CFO is a resident of Kaysville, and we did look at doing the Kaysville canopy as well. And the average size is probably 20 to 25 on that.
Okay.
But then they have other, if they have multiple canopies, then they can do that. So that being said, I would like to see, I think maybe we have to absorb, I think it goes back to what do we do for our commercial customers, and then I think that conversation will come back to play.
I wonder if in the time being we say 90% of what you project, you'll projected demand.
So the problem with demand ratings is it's going to be, you know, like they may only produce 20 kW, 10 kW, so most commonly is off a kilowatt hour design.
Is it?
Yeah. So I think it would decrease your size like Smith's. What's Smith's demand? Just out of curiosity, it can't be that high.
What their demand is?
Yeah, roughly.
Smith's, I'm trying to think. I think Smith's about 250, 300.
So yeah, 250, 300, and you
300
could probably
kilowatts.
put a 500-600 kW array on that building.
Okay.
So just to give you
Yeah.
an idea. I think that it'd be best to base it off of kilowatt hours, my opinion, but
Okay.
sorry.
No, that's fine. That makes sense to me. I've thought kilowatt hour makes sense, but I could see both ways. So the next point was we wanted to add a tab to show sales credit from new amps. I couldn't remember who was interested in that. I'm not quite sure if I know what we're after on that one. If it's just, I don't know if that's part of actually modeling what we're after, or if that's just for metrics and information.
Yeah,
But-
I was just curious what they were paying us for our surplus. And any surplus
Okay.
power that we were selling back to UAMPS. I was curious what that,
And that's all on each of the bills in the pool and the unplanned pool sales, so it's on each bill. At the bottom, I can show you in the middle. The middle one is the actual cost of what they're paying.
and it'll give you a cost per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, because megawatts, but you just, yeah.
So do you want me to add an action item, or do you want to look at that, Alan? And
Well, it's relevant because that's what we're gonna get for the surplus solar power that we have to unload, that we're not going to use. Because we're already unloading surplus power.
That's right. And so the discussion, I believe, was, I feel like I think that I said that the rate was 4.5 base, somewhere in that range, and then I think Alan was just wanting to confirm that what we're getting, just so that when we're looking at selling back on a non-load basis, so basically if we are net metering, then we're just trying to validate that we can sell it on the pool for the rate that we would send it back down the line. Is that correct?
Well, it should have some relationship to what we're going to pay for that.
That's right.
You know, there's no reason for us to pay more than we can sell it for.
That's right.
So just so we're clear, do we sell power back whenever we don't reach our peak subscribed amount?
Yes, anything excess goes into the pool, Rescue Amps members can buy
Okay.
it for that cost, and then if they can't sell it, goes on open market, and it goes to unplanned pool sales, which is a lot lower
Okay.
cost.
So we're mostly selling back because
All the hours
All
during,
that.
all the hours during the day,
except
the
for a
whole
few
year.
hours during the summertime.
Only, yeah, we have those 3 peaks in that's it.
Okay.
What'd you pay last week for power?
What's that?
What'd you guys pay on peak last week?
I haven't looked at what the,
I seen it was 60 cents, 65 cents is what we were selling it to some other people for.
Per megawatt
Because
hour?
of that heat spell. Anyway, sorry.
So that works out to like 6 cents per kilowatt hour, doesn't it?
yeah.
65 cents.
65 cents per
So it's
kilowatt hour?
Yeah, $6.50 per megawatt hour.
Whoa.
Super
Wow.
high.
Hmm.
But what were you selling it for in April at 10 or 11 o'clock?
So can't talk about it, but we have a good power purchase agreement right now on some of these.
Maybe we should, down the road, get some on-site, some Kaysville City batteries and
I think we should.
sell it
I like
back,
that.
make a bunch of money in the summertime.
So California is currently selling power, or is giving, essentially they're surplusing solar and they're paying you to take it right now. So,
Wow.
So we could actually take that power and make money on solar right now, if you could take it during the times that they want.
During the times we're already surplus.
That's right.
That's why they're giving it away.
See, that's where John's battery idea comes in, because that's when you charge your batteries.
That's right.
That's right. Never mind, I tangent, but I'll bite
Okay,
my tongue.
so is that an action item then? Do we want to, Bruce, will you take that action and just tell us what that rate is? Would that be okay?
What the rate is?
That we're on pole and off pole that we're selling back?
Oh, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, while you're typing that in, I do want to share a tangent. So there's a new battery charger on the market for electric cars. It's a charging station, and it ties into a customer's solar array, and when the solar array is backfeeding, it then tells the car to start charging. So whatever is backfeeding, it only charges the car that much. And if the array backfeeds less, then it throttles the car back. And so you're basically zero while the car is charging.
That's awesome.
Kind of a neat idea.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, we talked about permitting requirement for each solar array connection. I'm not sure if we've got an action item for that.
So I think the discussion was, we were worried about, and I think that was Patrick, right? We were worried about wind loading.
No, that wasn't me on the wind loading, but what is going on our system? I mean, if we're gonna have units, if we're gonna have customers playing power
Oh, that's right.
entities,
That's right.
then we should have a say on what inverters they've got, or what panels they've got, or, I mean.
Do you want to talk into your microphone, because if
Oh,
people are
sorry.
watching, they
It's
probably
no
can't.
different than putting up a garage or an exterior building. There has to be an approval process. There has to be an engineer that overlooks it and says, okay, everything is par and everything is acceptable. And I would think that the power department would want to know what's coming back on the system, what people have inside that potentially in an outage, I realize that UL says, okay, no inverter can backfeed during an outage, but, okay, I go on Amazon, I buy something from China. No one knows until a guy gets up there and gets fried.
The building department sends all the plans out, you know, to have them looked at, but they, you know, if it's UL listed, it's UL listed and they're
Right.
okay to do, so.
Right. So I think that's where I was coming from, is if we're gonna allow this, then there should be some kind of a permitting process. You can't just go out and do it. Somebody's gotta overlook it, somebody's gotta give their stamp of approval. And even at that point, just like if you were to pull a building permit, there's a fee involved. There would be an upfront cost to putting an array on your house. I don't know if that's the case now.
They charge, I don't know, I'm not sure what they charge.
Okay.
They charge for that plan fee,
So it's just a plan fee. See, but we could even implement more, because we could say, okay, this is now impacting the transformer down the street.
Right, and if you're gonna go to the point eventually where you're gonna measure which direction they're facing and at what degree and stuff, you're gonna have somebody's gonna have to do that too, so
Yeah.
there's a whole, there's a bunch of things you can.
So I don't know that it's so much as an action at this point. I think this point, we've got to figure out the fee structure, but definitely that needs to be addressed. There needs to be something put in place.
I think
in the
that's already
city.
part of the plan check, because they're required to put the model of inverter that they're gonna install, and then the engineer, he'll look at that and say, okay, I don't see that on the UL listing here, that's not an allowed inverter.
Okay. And if that's the case, that's fine.
I think that the two questions that we may want to just know would be, that I like there, that we need to revisit is, do we have any power quality or communication requirements? If we're gonna, you know, do we want to see, if we're gonna go to the effort of bringing in fiber to everything, are those points that we want to see in our SCADA system down the road? I think that would be a question that we'd want to address eventually. And then, I only have one for now. I forgot it, so that's it.
So
Are you
I-
good?
Are you done?
Yeah, you're good.
So I agree completely with what Patrick's saying, and I mean, one of our items down here is other discussion items for upcoming meetings, and so I don't know that, you guys could tell me if you think differently, but I think that we can push through what we're trying to accomplish here, but I think that we push that action item or that topic to future meetings, and I think that's something that we should address, and we should get implemented and make up rules and implement them and follow up on it. But I think is a different step, not as part of this. Correct.
Okay.
Right.
I like that.
agree.
Is everybody agreed?
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds
So
good.
Stacy will get that in the minutes, and we can probably kill it from this list here.
Okay.
Okay. I will kill it. All right, forecasting into future years. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, other than we could, and I think this was you, Brock, so let me know what you had in mind, but what I was thinking is we just continue this trend on the financials, on the usage growth, and just see how the rates are being impacted. Or what did you have in mind for the
Yeah.
projections?
So I'm gonna dream big,
Yeah,
and tell me what you think.
if you're gonna dream big.
That's right. What I think we need to do is, I think we need to, and I don't know what UAM supports, but I think where we have 6 PPAs and them running out, I think that we have to forecast the next, you know, if you're gonna if you put a solar array, you're in for, you know, bankable life is 35 years. So, you know, we're essentially saying we agreed to take your power for 35 years. And so we kind of have to look at that rate. And so my question isn't today's rates, it's for the next 20 years when, you know, some of these coal plants drop off, change to natural gas, what are those rates and how are they affected, you know, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, those types of things. So that's kind of what I was hoping to do, is say, you know, go back to our UAMPS bill and say, okay, you know, IPP's gone 2025. Now, what kind of trouble are we in you know, when do we need to pick up a new resource, you know, and then have that modeled with growth, because I think we have a 4% increase of growth, and we're planning to be, from last meeting, 4% growth and a 10-year build out. So if we, in the next 10 years, we build out, and in 10 years we drop IPP, I think the risk that you run right now is, you know, if that's our lower cost, some of our, correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, I can't remember what our highest rate is, but our lowest rate's like 3 cents?
Yeah, the CRSP, the Colorado River Storage Project, the hydro is 3,
And then,
3.5.
and then what's our high? Can't remember. It was like 10?
It fluctuates depending on the month, on how much, what they produce. So it could be the wind, it could be Nebo, it depends on, it just depends. We don't take any right now currently from IPP. We don't take any right now.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. It'd be the same thing with any resource.
Okay. So basically how I understand that, and make sure everyone understands that, is that, you know, in 3 years from now, we could lose our 3-cent power, and then now we're causing a rate to increase that we haven't projected if we don't show those future rates on there.
Yeah, I see. So I think currently what the assumption is built into the model is we are kind of taking the average rates of all of this. We're taking our total bill, which is 9.6 million from UAMPS, and that represents everything mixed together in a pot. And we're saying over the long run, the bedded rate, the average rate of all of that is what we could avoid in the future. Like what you're saying, a contract comes up and maybe we don't have to subscribe to as large a contract in the future because we have generation here in our distribution system, assuming they're offsetting peak and different things. And so the long run cost savings built into the model is kind of an average of all of our resources. And so what you could do is say, I'm going to look at it more specifically and see when that's coming up and what would be the first one and what is that rate, and try to get more specific data. Is that what your ideal, your big dream would be?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So I guess
that makes sense.
I'm having a thought with your model. I mean, if we were to do our best to project either a 5-year or a 10-year, or maybe you guys have a recommendation. I mean, it's just going forward as we review this rate structure, we have something in place that says our philosophy is that we will do our best to model X years out, and then take that into account in the rates. It's just one thought of how to address what you're saying.
How do you do that now? Like, we have stuff that's going off in the next 5 years. And I think we're looking at buying a resource right now, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Oh, no, well, we're talking about looking at the carbon-free power project, which is small modular reactors for the future, and that is thinking about that, our coal plants being off by then. So, yeah, we're looking into that right now, yeah.
So do you have a recommendation on years, how far we should model this out?
It's pretty tough to come anywhere close to it. Even when we start a project, even by the time you start and by the time you're done, that number changes a lot by the cost. But, you know, I mean, if we stay 5 years out, I think that's, you know, that's reasonable. And then look at it each year as far as projecting it beyond that.
Okay.
And that seemed kind of reasonable to me as I started to process it, you know, but definitely respect your perspective better than my gut feel.
What's the first resource that we lose?
That we lose? First one, San Juan is the first one goes up. We only have 1.5 megawatts of that, so it's not much, and that's not really going to affect a whole lot. Hoping to keep Hunter running as long as we can, because that's 25% of our load, and it's our next cheapest resource because the debt's paid off on that one.
Are we still in the dreaming big phase of this?
Always dream big.
So here, I was just running some numbers one day, and since we're dreaming big, hypothetically, what if Kaysville spent $55 million on battery storage, and what that would do it's the difference in energy demand from our load in the middle of the night to our peak demand, that it would make up that difference. And so it doesn't really matter where our power comes from. We can buy it when it's the cheapest, and it could be negative on the open market. We buy it when it's the best time, stores in the battery, we're not tied up to any of these long-term contracts, but yet we have this really stable energy source. The more solar customers come on, it doesn't really impact anything because we're not have to sell it back. And anyway, that's my big dream. $55 million though.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, we're spending, what, $10 million towards UAMPs for energy, just the energy alone, it kind of pencils out.
How long do the batteries last?
10, 15 years, maybe longer. Yeah, they degrade over time, so, 15 years from now, they'll only have 70% of their capacity. That's when they consider it an end of life is 70% of its original capacity. So 15
So if
years
if
later,
you're
you
dreaming
start
big
swapping them out.
and you assume in your dream that you can offset $10 million,
Yeah.
and it costs you $55 million, then your
Uh-huh.
payback's 5.5 years.
Yeah.
In reality, you're probably still going to have some purchase going on,
Sure.
right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I guess
So
that's the analysis you
even
make
if it
is,
took 12 years to pay off, and then if the power went out, Kaysville City's still up and running. It's kind of a pipe dream
It's a good
idea,
dream.
but
It's a good dream. I like
I
that.
think Gary and Bruce would.
So I think where we should put that, John, is we should put that on the solutions presentation, run the model and see what it turns out to be.
okay.
So I'm thinking put it on solutions presentation, because that's the next piece that we're doing it. Sorry, I'm just watching time now. Let's just keep cruising, and then
Yeah.
obviously we're in
Go on.
model review. So do we want to hold these, or do you want to, I guess, I kind of put you down this, going through all of these.
I
And my
think we're
question
about
is,
to the bottom of this list, so
okay,
let's finish this out and
then go back to the model?
yeah, I'm kind of counting this all as model review.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
So we talked about the billing software upgrade. I think that in meeting with Dean, we are including the anticipated cost of that in our 5-year plan as part of the AMR, or am I remembering that wrong? So we've got our 5-year plan. Let me just make sure. We've got 1.6 million in here. I think we talked about there wouldn't be a whole lot of requirement to upgrade our billing system based on some feedback we received.
Strictly AMI. I understand that from what we're discussing, our current billing software
Can handle it. So there's not, so I think we were just concerned that there's some capital that we need to add to this, and it sounds like we're good.
That could be the fiber optic portion of that. That could be, around 2.2.
In addition to what's in here already.
6.
Okay. So this may need to be 3.8, really, to get the fiber optic.
No,
3.8, no, it'd be
2.2.
just the additional 300, 400, and the 1.6.
He's giving you the total.
So it'd get
Oh, the
close to
2.2 is the
2 million.
total. Gotcha.
It's getting close to 2 million at that point, or
Okay.
So you're saying to take the 1.6 and put it at 2.2, and that'll cover your billing software and the fiber optic upgrade, is that
Yeah.
correct? So do you want to make
I
that?
don't think the billing software is much of that at all.
Okay,
So if we go ahead and change this to 2,200,000, and then rerun these numbers, that should take care of that item there.
And that was kind of a ballpark guesstimate too, as far as, because we don't have any bids yet on the AMI, so
okay.
for that part of it, we gave some rough guess a year or so ago, and so,
Hopefully it came down.
yeah, that'd be nice, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just update our rates here so we can see what that impact is and then move on. Whoops. I'm gonna change this cell by changing this. Get our customer charge. And then that should all flow through, and then just the last one. Sorry, bear with me just for a second here. And that should be equal to, hold on a second. 9,434,7.
It's actually my favorite thing to watch people fumble through their models.
It's a,
Uh-huh.
He's cruising.
It's very relaxing watching.
It is.
Yeah.
Glad I'm not on the spot, so you're doing great.
yeah. By changing the cell. 9434, 9434. Things match, so I think we're good. Okay, so with that addition, that's gonna probably increase our customer impact. Now, we were at 4%, and now we're at 4.5%, so not a huge change. Just
And clarify
have to
what
see
that
that.
4.5 is. 4.5 for every customer?
This is an average customer, so I'm saying our average customer uses 11,000 kilowatts a year, kilowatt hours. And if we were to implement this proposed rate structure, their bill goes from being just over $1,000 to being just over $1,000 to being $1,057. So the increase is on a dollar basis. $46 a year, which is 4.5% to their annual bill, which is about $4 a month. About $4 a month.
Plus the customer charge, is that right?
That's including the customer charge.
Okay.
So that's including the new rates, the new customer charge, everything. So that's your all-in bill, how much you're changing, so.
And that's just the average customer, right?
The average.
Probably want to take that and see how it applies to small users and large users and see what kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Cammie volunteered to help with that as well, right?
So will you trade that action item of just review small user and large users? If you can get rid of the billing software one, but just change that action item just to look at the, you know, a low usage profile and a high usage profile.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Our short-term implementation is really what we've been talking about today. So it boils down to our Schedule A. We talked about doing a percentage of usage cap. I think we are now saying for residential, maintain 15 kW cap. We're still at $8. And then on the KWH, so let me show you where we're at now. This is our Schedule A currently. There's a few things that are subject to change. We want to keep the tier structure we currently have. So to be able to model that, I just need to know how much KWH we'd expect in Tier 1 and how much we'd expect in Tier 2. And so we just need to get that specific. If we could get the most recent 12 months on that from our billing system, how much did we bill in Tier 1 and how much did we bill in Tier 2? And then we kind of assume that's the ratio going forward. And then we can say of our 97.5 kWh that we're charging, how much is in each tier. We come up with the rates right now. If it happens to be 90% in Tier 1 and 10% in Tier 2, then these are the rates we end up with. 8.6 cents in Tier 1 and 10.4 cents, or yeah, 10.4 cents in Tier 2.
Now, is the two tiers for just average every customer in the city, is that what those tiers are like?
This is specifically for residential, for all residential customers.
Now, I must have missed this in our last meeting when we talked about this. So what's the purpose of keeping the tier structure in place?
So the tier helps when you don't have time of use capability and you want to kind of reflect that the more you use, it gets more expensive. So you're saying, so for example, we talked about our demand costs, and there's a certain percentage of costs that we're allocating to our peak hour. And when we don't have time of use, we are kind of using tiers instead to reflect that the peak is more expensive than your off-peak usage. So the assumption is that when you go into that second tier, you're doing that during the peak time. And so it's going to be a little more expensive. And so I think it's meant to kind of encourage more energy efficiency and conservation and not to be driving your peak usage up. And so it's not as clean as the time of use rates, but since we don't have smart meters, that's kind of our tool to do that, if that makes sense.
That's the way it is now, yeah.
Yeah, so do they do that in Bountiful? Do they do a two-tier billing?
No.
They don't. I'd be curious to do a model without any two-tier, and just, so that the city council will have two different methods to look at, whether they want to continue with the two-tier or do just
Yeah.
flat rate. I
That's-
definitely would like to have that as a discussion.
Yeah, and that's actually pretty easy to model. So it's a little more complicated to do the two-tier, but if I just take the total revenue we're trying to collect in the volumetric rates, it would be $8.5 million, and then we would just be spreading that over our total kilowatt hour, not necessarily worrying about what tier it would be in. And you would end up with let's move that out a bit, 8.8 cents, which
Okay.
is just kind of in between these two. So you're just, yeah, so that's what it would be, just 8.8 cents for everything. What I was doing with the tiers is just saying, we'll just keep the current structure the way it is and not make changes to the current structure. If we wanted to eliminate the tiers, we could, so.
Yeah, I definitely would want that to be in the discussion of, here's what it'd look like if we keep the tier section in, or if we eliminate it, this is what it'll be at, just like what you've done.
Okay.
I think we need to look and talk and discuss about both.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll keep that in here, so that'd be 8.8 cents. And the customer charge still would be the same, so $850,000 total is what we'd be collecting from residential in the customer charge. And let me jump back to these notes, make sure we're getting everything. So this ended up being 8.8 cents. And this credit currently is 7 cents, but that's going to change when we know what the specific profiles are from UBROC. So talked about the permit. So that's our Schedule A currently. And we were talking about grandfathering, how we want to treat existing customers, if we want to provide an exhibit to the council on the impact on current customers and make a recommendation one way or the other. So any thoughts, any additional thoughts on that of what we would want to recommend?
I would just say that I think we need to have some kind of a timeline for sunsetting. I don't think that grandfathering should be a forever thing for them. Every time they get a new solar panel, it continues. I think that there's got to be a definite sunset for it.
So you're saying that you do believe that we should do some kind of grandfathering for the existing solar companies?
I think so, because they signed up under the terms that they are now under that assumption that that's what they would be getting, so I
think with that said, Bruce or Gary, I think that the contract said it could change at any time, right?
Yes.
And I'm not saying it one way or another, I'm just bringing back up
Yes,
the
all the
fact
net
that.
meter agreements say 30 days notice it can be changed. And like I told you last time we met, everybody for the last 2 years knew that it was going to change and that they
okay,
they
so
were not
maybe
guaranteed to be grandfathered.
maybe going back 2 years, but everyone in front of that could have a sunset timeline put into place.
Yeah.
From a billing perspective, obviously, it'd be easier to have the one classification, one rate.
Right.
You will take a lot of political heat if we change their rate. You'll have a swarm of them in here.
The existing solar
How
customers.
did Bountiful
Are you
metering change go?
Are you
Let's just talk
talking
about
about going from two-tier to one rate for everyone?
If we change the rate for the existing solar customers,
Oh, yes.
then you will bring a hornet's nest down on us.
Right. That's why I say we need to stick with the existing terms and agreements with those that we would grandfather in, and then it would be sunsetted as far as, you know, within reason as far as whatever terms they have with paying off their solar systems, you know, take that in consideration.
It's one thing that's interesting, if we do that, I mean, and I'm not saying I'm in favor of one way or the other, but it throws this entire model off, because everything that this model is based on is the assumption that we're bringing in solar customers to pay their fair share.
I would agree with that, but with that being said, I think also we have a commitment to those that did sign up with the.
I'm not necessarily
Well,
against
yeah.
that.
There's
Yeah.
also the concern with those who are existing signed up. I don't know how you would get the information for the net meter, for what they're producing, because the way the system was wired, there's no dual meters set up. It's just the one meter. All you would know was what was being backfed. And so you wouldn't know, you would have to actually physically rewire the system. For example, my house, it was done 6 years ago, and so power goes from the inverter, from the panels to the inverter, and then into a sub panel in the basement, and then out to the meter. Where today, a customer, they have to have power going from the inverter to a net meter, a PV meter, and then goes to the sub panel or to the main meter, and then the other meter measures what's coming into the house. So there's actually, the circuit has to be brought out to the meter before it goes to a sub panel, where there's all the older customers weren't necessarily done that way. My house included.
Sorry, John, yeah. But if you're just gonna pay them, say, the 7 cents, and depending on how you structure, you can do it in many different ways, but if you're gonna pay them that just for everything that we get back, you know, they can internally use all they want, you know, of their own power they produce, but any of the excess, we can do that. I told you, we talked about those meters. We just buy new meters, we use 2 Hertz, we get both readings, simple. Even the ones that don't have a production meter.
So it would be the 7 cents on everything that back feeds?
Well, this depends on how you set up,
Okay,
but that's
or
what
how
I
are
would do it, giving them whatever the value of solar is.
Okay,
on
that would
their
be
excess.
doable without having to rewire a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, they wouldn't have to rewire
Yeah.
anything,
Okay.
if you do it that way.
So with the solar customers and with me talking about the sunsetting, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you deal with a lot of them, and would you say that's the fair route to go? Or do you think that it's the right way to go is to go ahead and just bring them into the new system?
I've seen a lot of utilities do it all kinds of different ways. I will tell you that politically, this conversation's more of a political conversation than, you know, than the economics. I think there's room, and I think what we should do is to help reduce that. I think that where a lot of people make mistakes is by not involving industry. So there is a Utah Solar Association, and we can ping them with that'd be my recommendation, would be to ping them with what we're planning to go to 9 and to 7, and just grab their input to let them run their models, and, you know, because to be honest with you, a lot of the customers have a 20-year note on this, and so if you try to sunset them down to 10 years, then all of their economics went away. And so I think if we could just ping them and say, hey, what is this? That would be my recommendation to help reduce that. But I do believe that if you do not grandfather, I do believe that you will look like Nevada or Payson or Provo. Provo took it really bad. Bountiful's currently taking a little bit on some of their stuff. So my suggestion would be to reach out, send this to them as a recommendation, and let them run their models and see what they'd have to do, and maybe we invite them.
So do you have the ability to do that then?
Yeah,
And
I can
bring-
reach out. So Ryan Evans is the
And bring that
director.
back to us this next time we meet?
Yeah, so I think
Okay.
I'll invite Ryan to the next meeting and see if we can have him have him review what our numbers are, so, just to make sure that we're okay. The numbers that we're proposing is 9 and 7, and that's what we would send to them. Is everyone okay with those numbers that we would send to him? Okay.
And how do you two feel about that? Are you good going in that direction as well?
Sure.
Okay.
Lehigh just did theirs, and they're paying 4.3 cents for everything they put back on.
So one thing I might add as well is just to look at, if we do grandfather, what is the current subsidy on those existing customers, just so the council has a clear idea of how much the other customers bear as a result, so that you have kind of both sides. So the solar industry obviously is going to have one side of it, and then just to be sure that, okay, we understand that the customers are going to bear, if it's 100,000 a year, if it's 150 a year, whatever it is. Because obviously there's a cost to grandfathering. It might be good just to throw that out in an exhibit so everyone sees what that cost is and we're comfortable with it, just for the other non-solar customers to be aware of as well.
On what's going on?
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
ping that, maybe put on the city website. We send a ping out to all the other customers. Maybe not.
That's
I
where
don't
those
know.
lose, man.
I was
I
going to
don't
say,
wanna go there.
I bet you Bruce could come up with a good idea for the other side. I mean, wouldn't you be able to, as far as for the existing customers and the cost, keeping them keeping them the way they are to sunset them, what the cost is going to, what it will cost the city to do that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So obviously, if you're saying it costs us X amount currently, and we're going to allow, what do we have, 150 customers to not pay that amount, to just do.
So the rest of us are
There's
going
a
to have to
cost
pay a
there.
little bit more because we're sunsetting them, is what
Yeah,
you're saying?
yeah,
So we
right.
need to know how much more, what that
Just
difference
what
is.
that dollar
So
amount.
maybe Dean can help you with that as well on,
We have actual numbers, you can put it in a model, it wouldn't be, you know.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, it'd just be taking our 150 customers and what that net metering currently is and what it would be if we were to move them, and just say the difference is kind of what the break is, what we're willing to bear, what the other rest of the customers will.
I think it'd just be the 2 cents on it'd be the 2 cents, it'd be the delta times the kilowatt hours they actually sent back to the grid.
Yep.
And then that would give you that number.
Right.
And then you would just have to make up, the 9 would have to increase to be subsidized that number for future.
Yeah, so now I'm thinking through too, you have the customer charge, which is a new thing too.
That's
So
what I was gonna ask
Are we
about.
are we talking about sunsetting just on the net metering credit to keep it at that retail rate?
I'd keep
Or are
it
we
separate.
saying, what's that?
I would keep the 2 separate. I would just keep net metering and the customer charge. I think that's a fair.
The customer charge for everybody?
Everybody.
But
Yeah.
then we'll
That's just
we'll
us
do a
being part of
grandfathering
the
for
That's the
that.
cost of maintaining a system.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and I think
think
we
that's
need
fair.
to do that.
The cost of having a meter on your
Yeah.
house and having reliable
Yeah.
electricity.
So that's an important thing. Everybody's has some change,
Mhm.
but for those who signed up, we're giving possibly a break there on the volumetric.
Sorry, man.
Okay.
And the sunsetting doesn't necessarily have to be a
Okay, thanks, man.
20 years from now, it totally changes. It can be stepped into that.
Okay.
And I think that definitely, we put an end to, I think 20 years would be the end, would be a fair end, for sure. For anybody that signs up, 20 is a real fair number.
So instead of grandfathering, we have a 20-year sunset?
Well,
Is that what- is
you
that
know
what you're
what, I actually would ask, and this might be, it's only for 150 customers, to go back and see how long they've been in the system for net metering, and then maybe make adjustments according to how long they've been in. So that once
idea.
they,
20 years from the time they.
yes,
That's
yes,
fair.
then we can say, okay, that's your time limit.
Connect dates on all of them, so yeah,
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I
Would
like
that be true if the home changed owners? Or
They
would
would
it-
still
would
have
that-
record of
or would
when
that,
they
like,
started, right?
Would that void the grandfathering?
Oh,
Because
oh,
the
yeah.
net meter, well, the net meter agreements don't
Transfer.
transfer either, they'd have to.
Okay.
renew 'em, but it'd still go off the original.
Okay.
And I'm speaking a little out of my realm, but I think the question would be, if you didn't grandfather per home, and then you have a note on the home. I'm not sure that this is our issue, but then does that home actually increase in value for solar or not? Because now they're going on to a new market and actually can be viewed as a, you know, as a liability on the home. So for example, if they're on there at 9 cents and then we put them on at 7 cents, then we just impact their investment. And so now if they have a 20-year no, and I'm again, I know what you're looking at. I just want to throw it out there that that it maybe look at an asset, and then how that affects all of us in Kaysville is what happens if we let these people, you know, what happens if we aren't good stewards, and now do we have housing pricing decrease because of, you know, solar PV essentially. It will actually affect all of us if, you know, all of our houses are based off of the next house and how much it's worth. So if that house is worth less, then it does have an impact on all of us. So just a thought on how we need to handle that piece.
Yeah, my only thought to that is solar panels have a lifespan of how many years typically?
20 to 30.
Yeah,
I'd say.
so over time, the solar panels are going to lose their value, and then either they're going to want to replace them, you know, so I don't know if it would have that big of a bearing on the housing prices as far as, because it is limited to what the value is on that, but, so anyway, I think it could go either way.
All right, I think that's all of the action items then, so I don't think we're too far off from being able to answer a lot of these questions and get the model updated for these. Brock, what were you?
I was just going to say, so solution presentation, where we sit right now based off the model, and I know that we took that down, and I know how much work actually went into that, so thank you for doing it.
Sure.
Yeah, this
So
has been really good.
I think currently the solution presentation is pretty much boiled down. I think the summary is the Schedule A for the short term, and then over the long run, kind of more of a time of use design. And so it's 2 steps. So once we get kind of these little hanging points figured out, and that'll adjust these rates. The 7 cents may go up or down. The tier rates might go up or down depending on these kilowatt hour charges. And then obviously we've got industrial and commercial to figure out as well once we get those metrics in. But I think as far as the solution goes that we propose, it's just boiled down to this particular tariff proposal. So
Schedule A, let me just recap then. What we're proposing residential-wise, will you go back to your notes just one second? Let's just make sure I'm on the same page. We're proposing a 15 kW cap to solar. We're saying an $8 customer charge for residential, nothing to do with solar. We're saying that the price per kilowatt hour will be either a tiered approach or not a tiered approach, and it'll be approximately 8 cents and 9.8 cents. Roughly 8.8 is the average. So depending on the tier 1 and tier 2 setup, we are proposing for sure that there'll be moving forward, we'd like to propose a 7 cent net metering credit, and then we're debating how to handle grandfathering. What about commercial and Schedule A?
So in Schedule A, what I would propose is step 1, we come up with a different class breakout so that we don't have a huge customer charge on small use commercials. And so that's part of your solution. And then step 2, just make sure you're collecting, you design. What I would do is maintain the current structure, so you actually have 3 tiers. You have your demand charge of everything over 8 kilowatt, and I would just propose adjusting, like right here I'm programming what is the percentage increase you would need to do to this structure to collect your total revenue requirement in the commercial class, 4.9. This 4.9 would be broken down into two pieces, your small and your large. And then you would just come up with what the percentage increases on the rates. So that still has some work to do on those.
So next meeting, my understanding is hopefully we'll have some more commercial thoughts, discussions on commercial.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe the timeline, maybe 14 days or so to be able to get the data. And then in July, I think I could have some of that modeled in. And then by the time we meet at the beginning of August, hopefully we have a proposal for commercial that we can move forward with, so.
Okay. And so we are,
And industrial, for that matter.
since we're in solution presentation, I just want to make sure, so we don't need a meeting between, throwing this in here, we don't need a meeting in between now and August, so we'll meet August 1st, is
Yeah,
that
I
correct?
think that gives me a pretty good to-do list,
Okay.
and those who are on
For
the
everyone,
to-do list. I
yeah.
think that'll
Okay.
bring us through July and
Okay.
Plenty
hopefully
going
have
on.
those done.
It's July.
Okay.
And I've got a son getting married.
Okay. So August 1st, it will meet. Okay.
Is
that'll
that
be
our
next-
first Tuesday in August?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. So that's a good deadline to try to have those things all wrapped up by August 1st, and we can go over them.
Okay, so then, is there anything else on solution presentation? Because that's a good segue to other discussions for upcoming meetings. Okay, so other discussions for upcoming meetings, some things that I put on here that still is on the radar is the battery storage concept. I put on here the power quality, which will be in the meeting minutes, and then the CHP, just trying to get Jeff Dixon. That was a couple pieces ago, or a couple meetings ago. So those are the three things that I have for other upcoming topics. Is there any other discussions we want to have?
Anything from staff?
I think that'll keep us busy for a month.
Okay.
You have your homework assignments.
Yes.
Unless you want us to report back on fiber, with some information in the next 4 weeks, we can do that.
Okay. Okay.
Are you thinking you'll have true numbers to report back with, or you will?
We're
Okay.
going to talk tomorrow about selecting the engineer, and I don't know what kind of timeline they'd have, but it could be August 1st.
Yeah, they said 2 to 3 weeks if we choose one or the other. Right now they're slow.
Okay. So I think that'll be good.
Okay.
We'll also have some AMI information back.
Yeah, our AMI comes back July 25th, so.
That's good.
we'll meet sometime after that and decide who's the best, or even, or look at our proposals, I guess.
Okay. Perfect. And then I have, I guess just as a reminder on the UAMS conference, is there anything we need to say on that? Stacy, have we talked anything on them?
Just get your forms back before you leave.
Okay. And then, so, the next piece is the approval of minutes. So has everyone had a chance? I know last time we talked, we wanted to wait till this meeting to approve the meetings before. So is everyone okay to vote on approval of those minutes?
Yeah.
So I'll entertain a motion.
Second?
Well,
All
who
in
made the
favor?
motion? Oh, you made the motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a little rusty, but I made it.
I didn't hear. Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Call to public. So open it up to you guys. If you guys have anything you'd like to say.
I do. I'm Laureen Kamalu, Planning Commissioner, and you guys rock. And I am incredibly grateful for where all of this idea originated and for your putting in applications and putting in time and expertise. It's impressive, and it's going to help our city so much. And so I'm just really grateful to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay. I don't know, did I take a motion? Help me out, Susan. Motion to close the meeting?
Yeah. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, I second that.
All in favor?
Aye. Okay.
Once a month is not enough for me to get it
I
down,
know.
so it's gonna take some time.